We built this sled about 15 years ago. I think it's time for a redo, but better yet, let's do an upgrade. Welcome to the Warrior Woodshop. My name is Mr. Rodaway, and on this episode, we're going to redo this table saw sled. While we're in the process of redoing, let's do a few upgrades because there's some shoulda, coulda, wouldas over the years. I mean, we did this sled at least 15 years ago. In fact, it was in our bookshelf video where my son, who's 21 now, was 4 or 5 years old. So it had to be 2008 or 2009. So this one has survived the years. Can't say anything wrong with it. In fact, it's pretty straight and true to sliding. Just our back wall has come loose over. It still functions, but it's time for an upgrade. There are a few things that we want to focus on in the upgrade. As you can see, our clamp has seen better days. Our stop blocks have just been clamped to the fence. So we want to go ahead and put a T-track in there so we can have a sliding stop block there. And I don't know if you can see it on video or not, we've got several holes where we have mounted fixtures and clamps to hold our work down. The other thing we want to eliminate is where students put their hands. This is common for most table saw crosscut sleds. Your hands are over the edge. In fact, a lot of times they arc down to kind of give you that visual ergonomical. But in a few lately, I've seen photos and videos, there actually is handles on the outside. That's going to solve a couple of issues or situations. One is it's going to keep the hands from wrapping over the edge. We are going to add a piece of plexiglass with some red taper on it to help visualize where your hand shouldn't be, and then have that block that a lot of people put at the back. That still doesn't prevent it from going too far, but at least prevents the blade from sticking out the back. But finally, with the extra 4 inches and where that handle is going to go, it's going to add a little bit of rigidity to this fence, so we can add some perpendicular brackets and be able to push without wiggling this. Part of it's MDF. And our hope is to build the King's Woodworking Ultimate Crosscut Sled. We're going to base this one off of kind of Bourbon Moth Woodworking, his simpler one. So our size is going to be still the 24, but we're going to make it 64 long. That should give us about 36 to 42 inches of stop block capacity to the right and about 15 or 16 to the left. So that's the size we're going to make ours. Adjust yours accordingly. Let me go get the base cut. We're going to use 1/2-inch pre-finished plywood. In our shop, we happen to have a panel saw like they do at a lot of the big box stores. If your plywood supplier won't cut it down for you, you can use a track saw or circ saw. And if you're using a circ saw, we have a video on how to kind of make a homemade track saw, because since we have this, we don't have a track saw, but occasionally we need to cut large sheets of plywood that we can't fit up here on the panel saw. So check out that video. I'm going to cut this to 64, rough cut, and we'll rip it to 24 on the table saw. One of the things you want to check before you get started is your fence parallel to the miter saw track or miter gauge tracks. We're going to set that to 10 inches there, right on the money.
Next, using some hardwood maple, we're going to cut a couple of 3/4 strips and check to see how their fit is in our miter gauge tracks.
A little snug.
We erred on the side of too big, so that way we can run them to the planer a pass or two to get them to fit just right. Now that we have them fitting for the width, next is go back to the planer and get them to the thickness.
20 sanding to knock the harsh corners off and get it to fit where it's just a little bit of drag right there, but not. We're going to pre-drill some mounting holes in here so that way we don't accidentally drill all the way through. And we're going to put some countersinks, so we'll be right back. Since these are just a smidge below the surface, we need to raise them up to where they actually contact the sled bottom, washers, pennies, dimes. All right, so lay that back in. That raises it up a good 1/16, and we're lining it up with the back of the table saw. We got our fence squared and parallel to the rails. We're going to put a little bit of CA glue in a couple of spots, some 5-minute epoxy, so that way we really make sure it sticks, because we got pre-finished plywood. And then after a few minutes, we'll go ahead and flip this over, so that way we can go ahead and permanently mount it with screws.
Apologize for not hitting the record button while we were applying the glue and setting the top. So make sure you keep it tight against your fence, and then use some weight while the glue cures.
Taking some 3/4 inch multi-material screws, because we got 3/8 and 1/2 inch, that's 7/8. So we don't want to bury these too much, but we want to get as much holding power as we can. All right, after we cleaned up a little bit of glue squeeze out and a few passes with the card scraper, what I was doing was looking for debris of metal or metal scraping, and using my card scraper there, I'll give it a light 320 and wax it. But this one's sliding really good. Once we wax everything, I think it'll slide even, or I know it'll slide even better. So let's get on to building the fences. All right, what we're going to do is cut 4 5.5 inch long or wide 64 inch long fences to make doubled up. We're going to go ahead and rough cut this material down to 24, just so it's a little safer, easier to handle on the table saw. Then we'll rip it down to 12, and then we'll finally set our 5 3/4. Again, just so it's a little bit safer and easier to manage on the table saw. Now we're going to focus on the fences. Being so long, even though this is Baltic birch and quality hardwood plywood, there's still a little bit of chance for it to bow. In fact, there is. So when we glue these together, I can see, I position these so that way the arcs are away from each other. So it creates the gap here in the middle. And that way everything gets closed up, and it should hopefully cancel it out. We're going to use the 6-foot level as we clamp these together. Also, do everything we can. Right now these are 5 3/4, 5 7/8. We're going to cut them down to either 5 or 5.5. In the center, they'll drop down to 4 on the outsides, where we'll put our triangular structural braces, but also handlebars holders, so that way the kids can keep their hands out of the way. So, all right, after this has had the overnight to dry, good shape. We got some glue beads right here. We know we didn't end up being level. We're truly square. That's the point of the next step, is going to the joiner, and then we'll cut the excess table saw, or table saw off the excess on the other side. All right, I've got a dry fit going. Obviously, these make it heavier, so what we're going to do is we're going to do the traditional arc up, arc down around the blade. So maybe these are only 3.5 tall here on this end to lighten the load, but enough to get a stop block. So what we're going to do is mark the center of the blade. See how far that is from the edge. 15 inches. Alright, so we're going to go to 12, and we're going to go to 18. Let's see how that looks. So I'm going to start 10 inches in. I'm going to make the traditional arc, and then down to 3.5. So I'll cut off about 2 inches of height. Here's a trick I learned from watching Norm on the New Yankee Workshop, doing stop cuts. Find the front, put a mark, and transfer that line up. When this line, or this point right here where I want to stop, meets that line, That's the bottom of it. No big deal. It'll all work out in the end. Around the side. Alright, there's number 2. Cut the first one out, traced it over to the second one, and then the same procedure twice. Do these need to be exactly the same? Depends on your OCE level, and I don't mean any disrespect. They're going to be 15 to 24 inches apart, so as long as they look identical, they don't have to be exact. That's my opinion. You can do what you want. If you wanted them to be definitely exact, cut the second one slightly oversized and use a router with a flush trim bit to get them identical. All right, so our next step is to move over to the actual dado blade and get a 3/8 by 3/4 groove, cut down the front fence. We don't need to cut any grooves in here because we're using the King's Fine Woodworking method and the Bourbon Moth method of just stacking and screwing. The only difference between ours and the King's Fine Woodworking, well, we use 1/2 inch instead of 3/8 for the base, but we're not going to make our 2 pieces in the middle adjustable because this one's for 1/2 inch and 3/4 dados all the time, so that's about as zero clearance as we're going to get because we're not, very seldom will we use a single blade on this one. Occasionally we will. Got a 1/4 inch radius bit, barely, so it's rounded over. Then I got a watches right here on these slotted edges. I probably should have done this part first. All right, they say you're not a real woodworker until you spend more time making jigs than you do building the project. It probably took me about as long to build this little jig and get it measured out that it did to drill the 6 holes. It's important that this one is stop locked, but obviously it's a big margin of safety issue. So, and the other safety note is, you notice the fence is on the right because we're going to want to rotate that way. It pushes it into this corner, and then we're going to use a big old kindergarten pencil to kind of make sure our hands don't violate the margin of safety and keep that downward pressure. All right, this is where the dry fitting comes into play. I decided to make a design change. You can see I cut channels. I should have put some shims on. These are actually 23/30 seconds, but I cut a 3/4 dado. But that should allow glue to get on 3 sides rather than just one. And everything is flush on the bottom. So let's go ahead and then with the groove on the back side here, allows me the chance to put a nail in it. All right, here's where we add the glue. And put the solid one in. Again, I will admit it. That'll make much safer hand placement. All right, while we're waiting on the front fence for the glue to dry, the back fence can go ahead and get attached. Up this way. This does not have to be precision square. We're assuming if you cut your platform square, that should be straight up. You're really not referencing off of it, so don't get too critical So what we're gonna do is flip this over, glue it, use a couple of quick grips, and then screw it from underneath. Let it hang over the edge. Decided to add a little bit of aesthetics, get those corner jabbers out of the way. All right, hopefully the last thing we can get done today, trying to get as much done as we can, is getting the front fence or the main fence attached semi-permanent. All right, we're gonna put one screw in there. We're gonna straighten it. I think with the dado cut, we got just a little bit of a bow, probably when we tap these in there. So we're gonna try to straighten it before we put this back one in there. And before we put the back one in there, we're also going to square it off of this edge, because remember we checked for parallel, so in theory it should all be good, but we want to double check. So I'll go ahead and put this screw in. This one we're not gluing, so we can always have room to adjust. If you have to adjust, you have to drill new holes. That's the one downside to this. Alright, so I'm squaring off there, and that looks pretty darn good. Now that we got the outside screw secured, we're going to straighten everything up with the level, and then apply a couple more screws, one in the middle and one on the edge. With a shorter crosscut sled, you'd only have to do 2 screws, not 3. And so far, so good there. Attention to detail. Take your time. I honestly thought this would be a 1-day project, maybe a 2-day. We're going into day 3. I've only had about 3 or 4 hours, but I did some changes and things like that. So take your time. This is our second sled, so that's why we knew the adaptations and the little things that matter. Last one was around for 10, almost 15 years. I hope this one outlives my retirement. All right, we're at that point. We've got the regular table saw blade installed. I know we're gonna use this for dados primarily, but we're gonna make sure that we got this fence square. We don't want to cut through the back fence at this point. We want to cut about 2/3 of the way, because if we cut the back fence and try to square it, it'll create a weak point. So we want to make sure we can maintain that strength. I think this will help me plug it in. You can see we're about a 1/16 to a 32nd out. So we're going to take this fence. We'll leave the screw that's on the left there and just pivot the fence just enough to get her square. Normally you won't have to do the level trick, but like I said, we had that accidental dado on the wrong side. So I'm going to drill 2 new holes. Don't reuse the old ones. Yep, that's a 6-inch cut. All right, time to secure the fence permanently. Now we're going to go ahead and install our T-track. We're going to go about 6 or 7 inches off the blade, so that way you're outside the margin of safety. And then since we got such a long sled, we're going to add a couple more for additional clamping on those longer pieces. And it worked out real well that we took a 48-inch one and cut it into 16-inch pieces. And since it's 3/8 of an inch thick, we're using 3/8 of an inch thick Baltic birch to fill in the voids.
And this is always replaceable. If it happens to get splintered, wore out, you want a new zero clearance. Most of the time, this shouldn't be changed. We did later on in the video slide the T-track forward. You'll see why when that, but it makes it easier to install. And the T-track is actually only 16 inches long, and our bed is 18, so that way you can get the clamps in and out. Otherwise, the T-track will be, or the T-bolts will be in there permanently. Safety first, safety always. We're going to add a plexiglass screen, a little bit of red electrical tape around it. Just again, one more time to make sure, keep your hands away. Since we're using this for 3/4 dados, most of the time, we're going to go ahead and make our zero clearance pass. And we don't want to go all the way through this time, so that way we can check the setting at the back.
Putting a little bit of finishing touches on it here. You're proud of something, you let the world know, even if it's on YouTube. Give a shout out to JB Scale Graphics. Well, now that we've embellished it a little bit and added a little bit of safety, we've used this a couple times in our demo today in class. Everything works out really good. We have added a few, hopefully, safety features. They're not foolproof, but they're better than nothing. One is the plexiglass wrapped with red tape to kind of give you a visual. We did have some of that heavy-duty floor caution tape, so we put some of that on each side of the blade cut. Put a couple little visual reminders here, and then made a see-through cover so that way when they can see when the blade comes through. We've instructed the class that try not to cut all the way through. This doesn't go all the way down. That way you can stick a shop vac. I use this as a demo. Pretend this is a shop vac hose. That way you can clean out that. If it really got into a mess, 2 screws and that plexiglass cover comes off. We went ahead and put all 4 stops on it because I think it's more likely to get used if they're there. And the other thing we did off camera was move the T-track from tight against the fence to tight against the back fence, because that way, if you don't need this one for some reason, you can push it to the back. This is the one you're probably going to use the most, but rather than if you push it all the way to the back, it will come off. And yes, you can get away with 2, but having to switch them all the time, when most of the cuts we're going to be making are from 4 to 12 inches wide. So this allows us just to have them. They're doing a long, we'll say our dartboard cabinet is 32 inches tall. They can actually use the stop block, tighten that one up right back here, and then use 2 of the clamps to hold their project down. We went ahead and added a second stop block to this side, so that way for cutting rabbets. And I'm a big fan of the Katz Moses stop block. I've never used it, but it sure looks like a quality product. Bourbon Moth uses it extensively on his. Maybe if we do this to our miter saw station, we might add that one, but too many times I've seen this stop block, when we used to clamp it to the fence, get hit or cut. And obviously an aluminum stop block would not be the best scenario for that. So this is a replaceable stop block T-nut. We do have a spot on the back that if you needed to get it out of the way, it gets out of the way here on the back. So one of the biggest things that we didn't have in our other one was the handles. They had to hold up here. Like right now, it's uncomfortable with that stop block in place. So this grab handle, and you can grab over here and push on this side if you needed to. We also figured out that that side handle allows for kind of like a suitcase carry. So if you need to get it out of the way, it's kind of so a double feature there. All right, we'll go ahead and demonstrate it making a rabbit cut in one of our practice pieces. Let me get that set up. I usually do what's called a cleanup pass. I ran it through twice to make sure nothing lifted. With these clamps, it should be pretty good. Obviously, wait for everything to stop before you do any adjustments. a few extra seconds it takes to shut it down is not worth risking an injury. And there's my rabbit. 15 years in the making, probably 5 to 10 should have been done 5 or 10 years ago, but YouTube has definitely helped out. I want to thank Bourbon, Moth, Cats, Moses, and the King's Fine Woodworking, because those are the 3 primary ones that we did. I don't know anybody that added handles right off hand from memory, but I've seen a lot of photos, and it's just one of those things that I think is well worth it. You do lose about 3 or 4 inches in your crosscut capacity. We only have 18 inches instead of 22. Hopefully you got something out of this on how to build this crosscut sled. The kids are excited to use it. We showed them how to do it today in class. You got any comments or suggestions? The other nice thing about this one is there's no dadoing for the T-track except for the fence. If you get the Cats Moses, it can go on top. So there's a lot of things I'm excited about. The improvement. So I got 3 to 6 years before I retire. I want to see this sled still in use when I retire, and based on the history of that one that I threw together in a weekend also, I don't think we'll have any issues with this one lasting here in the Warrior Woodshop. So thanks for watching. Sounds like you need to go out and build yourself a crosscut sled. That's probably why you're watching this video, right? So while you're doing that, go out and make some sawdust.